Welcome to a very special edition of the Wempire podcast. My name's Rebecca Crockett, and as part of Wempire's month-long series on medical misogyny, I'll be speaking to the people fighting to close the gender health gap. This week, I'll be speaking with Lois Shearing, a sex and lifestyle writer you may have seen in Cosmopolitan UK, Metro, Diva, among many others. Their book Pink Pilled is out now. It explores how women are being recruited online by right-wing communities. Also, how young women are now engaging more with alternative medicines. We'll be speaking with them about it, as well as their journey with endometriosis as a queer person. Hi Lois, welcome to the Wempire podcast. If you want to get started, introducing yourself to us.
Hi, yeah, I'm Lois Shearing. I use all pronouns. I'm an author, a journalist, a general kind of creator of content, as we all are in this digital landscape. And I also am an endometriosis sufferer.
Lovely. And yeah, just to get started, do you want to tell us a bit more about your endometriosis journey? When did you get your diagnosis? Maybe first of all.
So, like most people with endometriosis, it's been a long journey, and kind of the first times I was going to the doctor and when I got diagnosed, there's a very long gap in between. I think for me, it took about 10 years.
Mhm.
I know that in the UK at the moment, the average diagnosis time is about 7 years. Um, so I first started going to the doctors about this when I was about 15, um, because I was like passing out at school. I would like get these really bad cramps, and I would also get like so anemic and lightheaded and dizzy, like when I was on my period, because I was bleeding so heavily, and like I was losing so much blood each month that I would just like faint and pass out, and have like really bad fatigue. Um, and I remember going to the doctors. I grew up in quite a small rural area, and the doctor told me, "Oh, all teenage girls faint." Um, and I was like, I go to school with a lot of teenage girls and they're not all fainting.
Mhm.
Um, and so I kept kind of going back to different doctors over the course of like the next 10 or so years, each time just getting dismissed, being told it was a bad period, being told I had IBS, being told like, it wasn't that bad and this is just what period pain is like. And then eventually I kind of got a bit luckier, quote unquote. When I was in London, I had a wonderful like woman doctor um, who like took me seriously. She, as is kind of the first port of call, always had to prescribe me the pill. I tried the pill for about 6 months. Like it really wasn't helping. It was having these really adverse side effects. So I kind of came off the pill. Um, and I was really lucky in that I was able to access some private healthcare. Um, I say lucky because, we shouldn't have to go private when we have an NHS, but it was lucky that I was able to access it. And so I went to this appointment thinking it was just going to be like a consultation. We were just going to talk. And it kind of started off like that. And she was being very dismissive. I got there and she told me like the first thing I should do to manage my symptoms is to lose weight and change my diet. Like she wasn't really listening to me. And she kind of said, "Oh, I'm going to do an internal ultrasound on you." But it was more the way she kind of phrased it was like, "I'm going to do this internal ultrasound on you just to like, so there's nothing to worry about," kind of thing. It's like she wanted to shut me up, basically. Um, so she starts doing this internal ultrasound, and during that ultrasound, they found an 8 centimeter by 8 centimeter tumor in my right ovary. Um, and kind of immediately from that ultrasound, she was like, "Okay, I need to send you down for an MRI like right now. We don't know what this is. We need to do your bloods." Like it was like a tumor the size of a golf ball, like in
Mhm.
my ovary. So about 3 weeks after that, I had an emergency laparoscopy, which is like a keyhole surgery where they go in and they use like lasers, almost like chopsticks, to take it out. And it was during that they were officially allowed to diagnose me with endometriosis,
Yeah.
because the kind of the gold standard in the UK is still to have a laparoscopy in order to get diagnosed, although that is changing a little bit now, and doctors will diagnose it without a laparoscopy in some cases.
Mhm.
So yeah, that was about 4 years ago. Um, when I had the surgery, they also gave me a hormonal IUD at the same time, which has helped to manage the symptoms. but I still have like a lot of problems with endometriosis. I'm like stage 3 or 4 at the moment. Um, so yeah, like a lot of people, it took a really long time to be listened to and to finally get a diagnosis.
Yeah, and I mean, within that, I think the figure, I mean, the official figure is 1 in 10 women have endometriosis. So, I mean, whenever you got the news that this is what it was, what was going through your head? I mean, did that feel uncomfortable to have that sort of what many doctors might see as like a very uh, feminized condition be put on you? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm gender fluid. I was kind of, it was kind of at the same time as all this was happening, as I was finally kind of putting language to how I felt about my gender. I had, like a lot of people, felt for a lot of times, kind of since I was a teenager, that I didn't really feel like a woman or like that. I felt like a woman sometimes, but not all the time. And, there was a lot of stuff about being called a woman that felt uncomfortable to me. And so it was around the same time as I was getting diagnosed that I kind of started to use the term gender fluid or non-binary and kind of think about my pronouns and stuff like that. So it was really weird to constantly be going to like the women's healthcare center is like what it's called at the hospital near me. And like the anecdote I always tell is like I was obviously I just got this diagnosis. So I was doing a lot of research into what endometriosis is and kind of, I think it's really natural when you're faced with something scary and unknown to like, and the first thing we all do is Google it. Um, and one of the websites I came across described endometriomas, which is what the tumors you get with endometriosis are called. They described them as female tumors. And I was like, how does this? Because I hadn't had surgery at this point, so I still had this like tumor inside me. And I was like, how does my tumor have a gender? like, um,
It's so bizarre, like when you think about it, like what is
I also remember some friends and I jokingly to help me feel better. We called the tumor Tony. Um, he was called Tony Blair because he was a useless sack of blood that you don't want inside you. So
perfect?
yeah, we were like, well, this tumor's a boy anyway. So
Yeah. Oh, that's so strange. I wonder if like I don't know if there's sort of support groups for tumors that sort of, decide that they're not actually female. And
yeah,
you know what I mean? And there's a whole different world out there for tumors.
yeah,
That's insane.
and
Um,
all of the
yeah.
language around endometriosis is very kind of um yeah, very like feminized and talks about women's healthcare and women's health issues. And um, the other thing I've really struggled with as a queer person, like a non-binary person, is, and I understand why it's like this,
Mhm.
because obviously this is the case for most people, but so much of the focus for any of the resources and all of the healthcare is on maintaining your fertility.
Mm.
Um, and I think for myself, and even for a lot of like cisgender women, when I was like getting diagnosed, she said, "Oh, don't worry, we're going to do this surgery, but I'm going to like try everything I can to like protect your fertility." And um, for a while, I wasn't sure. I didn't know until I went into surgery if I was just going to have a laparoscopy or if they were going to have to take the whole ovary because obviously a huge tumor, it done a lot of damage in there. And so she wasn't able to tell me until I woke up what kind of surgery I'd actually had. Um, and so, like, part of the discussion she had was like, I'm going to try and save your ovary to kind of so you'll be more fertile. And I remember having this conversation with her where I was like, I don't really give a fuck. I don't want to have biological children. If I will be healthier and in less pain if you take the ovary out, just take it out. Um, which is kind of a still ongoing fight in that I still have endometriosis in that ovary. It's spread a little bit now.
Mm.
Um, but I've still been pushing to kind of have my ovary removed. And because I'm a kind of young quote unquote woman who's not married and doesn't have children, so many doctors are just like, like, oh, you'll change your mind and you'll want kids in the future. Um, and it's crazy that in 2025, that's still like placed above, your potential reproductive capabilities are placed above your health and well-being by like doctors and the medical establishment.
And was there any conversation, or was it just like them assuming that that is what is going to take precedent over everything?
I think it's just them assuming, because I've, spoken to doctors about I don't want to have biological children. Also, the irony is that one of the first things they tell you when they diagnose you of endometriosis is it will be very difficult for you to get pregnant, or like it will be more difficult for you to get pregnant. Not everyone with endometriosis is infertile. I think the percentage is like 30%. Um, so it's like this weird irony that they're like, this is a condition that affects your fertility. But then if you're like, cool, I don't care, then like take it all out. They're like, no, you'll be infertile if we do that.
I mean,
It's yeah.
I don't know if you've ever had the experience, but I've spoken to people who have actually been, the advice has been you should get pregnant because it'll ease your symptoms. Has that been something that you've experienced as well?
I mean, I think they take one look at me and my haircut and are like, you're not someone who's going to be getting pregnant. No, I'm just kidding. Like,
No, I hope they don't like decide people's healthcare.
no, no.
But imagine just like,
Yeah,
I've spoken to your barber and we've discussed this and no.
yeah. I've spoken to lots of like straight women who have endometriosis who have been told like if you have a baby or if you get pregnant, it will make your symptoms better. And I'm like, that's a big commitment for an if. Um,
Yeah,
but I've not had that,
yeah,
luckily, I guess.
yeah. Yeah, so to sort of delve more into that, like to speak more generally about uterus care, what do you
Mm.
think are the main differences between sort of the needs of cis people and the needs of genderqueer people? What do you think?
Yeah, I think like it really depends. For example, like trans men and trans masculine people who are on hormones have like slightly different gynecological healthcare needs than like AFAB people who aren't on testosterone.
Mhm.
Um, like with, I think one of the big things that is not talked about is you can still get pregnant if you're on T. Trans men get accidentally pregnant more than a lot of people realize because it's just really not spoken about that you still need to be using contraception if you're on testosterone.
Mhm.
Um, I think just like a lot of the issues I've had to tell an anecdote that's maybe a bit TMI. Um,
Nothing is denied, don't worry.
one of the first internal ultrasounds I had when I was like initially kind of trying to get like find out what was happening. Um, Obviously, an internal ultrasound is like a little thing on a wand that they put inside your vagina to kind of have a look at your cervix and your uterus and stuff. And I had this nurse, and she kind of said to me, like, she asked me, "Are you sexually active?" And I said, "Yes," because I was. Um, but I was sexually active with another AFAB person at the time and had exclusively been for several years. Um, and so she kind of did. She put the wand inside me, and it was quite painful, and I made like a noise. And she was like, "Oh, I thought you were like sexually active. This shouldn't hurt." And I said like, "Oh, I'm sexually active with like another woman, quote unquote." And she was like, "Oh, then we should have like taken different steps." So even just like the assumption that if you're sexually active, you're having penetrative sex,
Mhm.
and therefore, which also isn't true for a lot of straight women. I mean, there's everyone's anatomy is different, and like these procedures are uncomfortable regardless, and like being penetrated in a situation where you're turned on and more relaxed compared to a medical situation is really different. And so I think those assumptions that we're still like up against, um, I think like affects queer people more acutely, but does like affect all like women and all people who try and access this kind of healthcare.
Yeah. And like, do you have any idea of like how we go about addressing these issues? Because it's not just, I don't know, I don't know about you, but a lot of these issues, it's not going to be fixed overnight. They are so embedded into the system. It's a big question, but do you see a way out of that?
Yeah, I mean, you're so right in that it's really embedded in the system, in that, like, so much of Western medicine is framed around, like, how to keep cis men healthy. And anyone outside of that is kind of an afterthought or kind of secondary.
Mhm.
Like, I don't need to tell you about how many studies have been done that were just done on like cis men, and that kind of healthcare or that kind of need doesn't actually affect anyone else. Um, but I think things are difficult right now because of like the political climate. I think for a while we were getting to a point where language on the NHS website was getting more inclusive,
Mhm.
and there was trainings happening where, like, my friend who's a trans man who has a big beard and passes all the time, he would sometimes go to the gynecologist and they'd be like, what are you doing here? Um, and so I think there was like, for a while, a few years ago, we were getting to a point where there was less assumptions being made, or like the NHS was making some changes. And I think because of the rise in transphobia in this country, healthcare is going to get worse for all of us because that the NHS is now so scared of upsetting like a small, really vocal group of people that they're willing to kind of dial back this idea that like you shouldn't make assumptions about the person sitting in front of you in the chair. Um, because like the answer is, when someone comes in and you're doing, I don't know, a smear test,
Mhm.
and they say they're sexually active, still ask them like, well, do you want the slim speculum or do you want the normal speculum? Because they might not be sexually active in the way you think, or also it might just hurt to have the medium one still. But I worry that we're in a place where we're going backwards a little bit in terms of how inclusive healthcare is.
Yeah. And you're so right of like whenever things change for like one group, it does impact everybody. Like even when you talk about how slim a speculum is, like having that taking that time to be like, well, maybe this person isn't having penetrative sex, like it makes queer people feel comfortable. It also makes people with conditions like vaginismus and endometriosis, like all these different things, like people's bodies are not a box that and yeah, it's infuriating that we are going backwards whenever those small steps were being made. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I also think about a lot. So I run something called the Bi Survivors Network,
Yeah.
which is like a peer-to-peer support network for bi people who've experienced sexual or intimate partner violence. Um, and it's like a thing that I've encountered a lot from talking to other survivors, is that like people who've experienced sexual violence often don't want to go get gynecological health care because it's like very triggering for them, or
Mhm.
they may have like reactions in the like in the clinic setting or whatever. um and so yeah, like that's another group of people that this kind of rollback is affecting, that no one's kind of thinking about.
I was just thinking there about what you said about studies as well, about how so much of what we know about the human body has been centered on cis men. And I just wondered what you thought about whenever you're seeing studies be done about endometriosis or like other healthcare conditions, what it's like to feel like you're not represented in that data. Yeah, just
Yeah, it is really frustrating because
Mhm.
it's such a minor thing to just say like, women or people with uteruses or just people with uteruses.
Mhm.
But I think the other really frustrating thing is that like people without uteruses can get endometriosis. It's really uncommon. There's only been a few cases of it. But there have been cases of cisgender men having endometriosis.
Yeah.
Um, so something I find really frustrating as kind of a like non-binary person with endometriosis is seeing transphobic people, quote unquote gender critical people, talking about like, you know, using endometriosis as a cudgel against trans women to
Mhm.
say, oh, you're never going to experience this. You don't know what this pain is like. Like, this is a woman's healthcare issue and you don't understand what it's like to not be able to access healthcare. Like, one, that's not true. Like, these bodies could get endometriosis, and accepting that means that we could have more data and studies look into it.
Mhm.
Um, but also, like, I feel very acutely aware that, like, my fight for more inclusive healthcare is the same as a trans woman's.
Mhm.
Like, it's the same people who don't want trans women to have access to hormones, who don't want me to be able to just like whip my uterus out. It is very frustrating that it would be such a simple thing to be more inclusive with the data. Um, and also, again, on the like moving past this idea of like endometriosis as a woman's healthcare issue, like there's so little data on intersex people with
Mhm.
endometriosis. Like so much of the data just focuses on cis women or AFAB people. Um, I don't know, it just means that we're not seeing the full picture, and it's very frustrating.
No, exactly. And like when you're not including people in that data, you're shutting down the that area of study altogether because like how can we move forward with it if everybody's care isn't improving? Um, so yeah, no, no. Um, so what I was going to ask, you mentioned there about hormones, and hormones are such a tricky thing to deal with because it's like everybody is different, everybody needs a different balance, and I'm interested in how you used hormones in your endometriosis journey and whether that it was ever talked about with your doctor about like symptoms or changes to your body even. Yeah, I'm just interested in
Yeah. I mean, I love my IUD.
that. Great.
This is the first time I've had one. And part of the reason I didn't get one until now, and by now I mean when I had surgery a few years ago, even though when I was a teenager and I was set, first going to the doctors with these symptoms, they were suggesting IUDs,
Hmm.
is that I kind of had heard about how painful they were to have placed.
Hmm.
Um, and as someone who wasn't having like penetrative sex or anything, like I was like fucking terrified of the idea of like having this thing placed. And so even just like the medical misogyny of why don't we give pain management for IUD insertion?
Yeah.
It feels so like medieval to me. And so in a way I was like lucky because I had mine fitted whilst I was in surgery. So I was like fully unconscious for it. Um, but yeah, I feel like the discussion around hormones, it's so murky at the moment because the pill and hormones do really affect your body and they do have a lot of adverse side effects.
Hmm.
Um, but there's a lot of people right now who are really using that to like discourage people from taking them.
Hmm.
Um, and so yeah, I there wasn't much discussion with me. I am someone who has struggled a lot with like the pill. It really affects my mental health.
Hmm.
Um, but I will say for anyone listening who's had similar symptoms, I was really worried that the IUD was going to affect my mental health, and it's been so much better than being on the pill was.
Okay.
Uh, so if you are thinking of a hormonal contraception, the IUD is, mine of choice. I think
Hmm.
it's quite good if the pill affects your brain like it does for me.
Yeah. It's one of the things in another episode that we talked about where contraception it is so wide ranging and everybody is gonna react to it so differently. So it is just finding what you gel with. It's really interesting. But I know that in your new book that's coming out, or by the time this is out, it'll be out, which is very exciting. You do talk about this sort of turn away from contraception into sort of natural cycles, natural things like that. Do you want to sort of talk a bit about like where that came from and sort of what you talk about in the book?
Yeah, this for me is a really worrying trend at the moment. Um, I literally just saw a piece on Grazia today about like the amount of women taking the pill has declined quite sharply, and that correlates really closely to the like a rise in abortion in the last kind of decades. Um, I'm very pro-abortion. That's not me saying abortion is a bad thing. Abortion is healthcare. We love it. Um, but what I saw a lot in kind of, so I was studying how women are radicalized into the far right, and I was seeing a lot of messaging coming from kind of far right influencers, coming from like far right outlets about like casting, like doing a lot of fear mongering about the pill, doing fear mongering about this idea that like it makes you less feminine, it makes you fat, it changes your sexuality. Like I saw one piece about how like the reason so many young women are identifying as bisexual is because like the pill tricks you into thinking you're bisexual, which like as an actual bisexual, I don't think so. um, and yeah, a lot of this fear mongering around like in order to get back in touch with your quote unquote like divine feminine, um, you need to like not be on any hormonal birth control, which at a time where like women's reproductive rights are under such threat, women's just like autonomy in general are under such threat, and there's like such fear mongering about hormones because of the trans panic that we've just been through, where puberty blockers and hormones for trans people and trans kids especially was so kind of maligned as like dangerous and experimental and bad for you. Um, that I think it's created this really fertile ground for fear mongering around the pill and hormonal contraceptives, which like the far right and the Catholic Church are like fucking loving because it makes their messaging a lot easier. And so I saw a lot of kind of young women in these communities where they were talking about natural cycles, talking about natural, quote unquote, natural methods of birth control, which is just a very fancy way of saying the pull-out method, I think.
Mhm.
Um, and also in kind of natural birthing communities, kind of getting suckered into these like very radicalizing,
Mhm.
like far right communities. So it was very scary to watch happen.
Yeah. I mean, it also goes back to the idea of like natural, that is so pushed in healthcare because natural fertility, natural ways to deal with it, and it is really dangerous because it sort of, you're right, it pushes this idea of like we don't need studies, we don't need, you'll be grand, go away, you'll be okay with it. So yeah, I'm really interested to read more and about the entire topic because it's something that I don't know if you want to give sort of a synopsis on like the book as a whole because it sounds something that I think Vampire audience would like really be
Oh,
interested.
yeah, it's called Pink Pilled. As of recording, it's out next week. Um, it is about women in the far right and kind of digital radicalization, if there is such a thing. I think maybe there isn't. Spicy little spoiler for you. But it kind of looks at the communities that, like, digital subcultures of women and young women online, um, and kind of how the far right use certain communities as recruiting grounds, and what that like pipeline and process looks like.
Mhm.
Um, so I obviously looked a lot at trad wives, which are really like people talking about a lot at the moment. I looked at kind of transphobia and kind of gender critical women. I looked at like wellness and alternative medicine. Um, I looked at diet culture and anti-fatness,
Mhm.
and just different ways in which women are kind of, yeah, coming to these very like extreme and authoritarian beliefs via kind of communities online.
Interesting. No, it sounds great. Congratulations.
Thank
Like,
you so
so
much.
yeah, and I'm sure everyone will be checking that out. One final question, I think, before we wrap up. I've been asking this to a couple of people, and it's very general. So I'll caveat it with that. But it was just to ask, what was one thing you would change about the healthcare system if you could change it tomorrow and it's completely, and then Wempower elves will go into the back and fix it for you and it'll be all great and perfect.
I would love that. I think our current healthcare system is built around a very capitalist notion. Um, and a very like colonial capitalist notion that healthy means like fertile and able to work.
Hmm.
And so like the endpoint of a lot of like healthcare and a lot of like getting better is getting people to a point where they're like as close to like the white cisgender male like 18 to 45, so like peak productive worker kind of body as possible. And sort of the more degrees of separation you are from that body, like the less good the data around your healthcare is, and like um yeah, like the less advanced your healthcare is. But also as someone with like endometriosis is a lifelong degenerative condition. I will have it for the rest of my life and it will get worse for the rest of my life. And I'm doing better at the moment, but like there were some points last year where like I was considering getting a walking stick because I was having so much like pain in my pelvis all the time that it made walking really difficult.
Hmm.
There are like endometriosis sufferers who use wheelchairs.
Hmm.
So I will have this condition for the rest of my life. Um, I am never going to be that like peak healthy worker that the medical assessment is pushing for. And so for me, it's quite a big sweeping change, but I wish there was more focus on like almost like well-being rather than health. Like how can I, as someone with endometriosis, live the best I can, the most pain-free life, the most mobile life, the most like fulfilling life. And I think a lot of doctors, when you come to them with a chronic illness where you're like, I will never be better, they just sort of like give up.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that's an ego thing for some doctors, but like if they can't fix you, a lot of them just like don't know what to do with you. And so I think that's what I changed, this idea that like the endpoint of healthcare is for someone to be like an able-bodied man again. um, yeah, that was quite a big one. If your elves could get on that, that'd be great.
They're working away. It
Oh,
might take them 2 days, but I think we can do it. No, but
that'd be
that
fabulous.
it's a really you bring up so many points there, because and that sort of idea of it is able like it is ableist when you think about what we deem as healthy and what we deem as unhealthy, and it's very annoying. It's like you don't know what else to say because it is embedded into the culture of health, and it's not gonna change overnight, but maybe.
That's not to say that if I could wave a wand and not have endometriosis, I definitely would.
Oh yeah, no, of course.
But
No, of course.
yeah, I just mean like, as I do have it, I wish the healthcare system would work with like, instead of trying to fix me, to
Mhm.
make, to like have a goal that was, how can I live as comfortably as possible with
Yeah.
this condition?
I think that is a very smart idea that you're using these powers with. So I completely yeah, I get you. So thank you. Well, if people want to go find you, where can they do that?
Yeah, so my social medias are a bit weird at the moment. Like a lot of people, I've deleted Twitter.
Yeah, Vampire have as well, actually. So we're right there with you.
I have a Medium, which is under the name Lois Shearing. I have a Blue Sky, which I think the at is Content King. Um, I have Instagram and Threads, which is under my actual name, which is Lake Faith, if you want to find that. And you can also, I have a couple of books out. They're all under Lois Shearing as well. Basically, if you Google Lois Shearing, you'll find uh, some books, some podcasts, some things I've made.
Brilliant. Great.
So much.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for listening to the Wempire podcast. To find out more, visit our website wempire.co or follow us on socials at Wempire UK on Instagram and TikTok, Wempire on Facebook, and Wempire UK again on LinkedIn.